San Jose last October, end users predicted a potential of a 39x growth in digital infrastructure in the next 10 years. Staggering. In London last November, our members made it clear that this growth has to be sustainable and that our community has to take the lead in finding a sustainable solution to support it. And I want to thank Martin Lynch, one of our advisory council members, and Patrick Oland, the chair of the Sustainability Committee, for their passion and persistence to get us organized. Without them, I don't think we would be here today. So thank you very much for driving and getting us all on the same page. What this led to is in February, we gathered a small team of industry leaders in San Jose to define what problem we were trying to solve. What are we actually coming together on? And it was an incredible session with some very passionate people. That generated 14 pages of notes that we had to synthesize down into the strategy document. We held another session just a few weeks ago to finalize the content for this summit. And what I was most encouraged by in these sessions is that it was a group that united to not only define the vision, but to commit to work on how we drive it together. And so that unity is just right back to the core principles that we've been talking about in iMason since the beginning. So that vision you see here is that every click improves the future. We believe that digital infrastructure contributes to the economy and society without harming the planet. So I'm delighted to be joined by 4 of the leaders that helped create this vision: Joe, Christian, Rachel, and Eddie. So they are from various companies. They've been involved with iMasons for a very long time. And I want to thank you first for your support and for your passion for what we're doing for the industry itself. So welcome, and welcome to our very first virtual conference. I think we're doing okay. I don't want to jinx it, but things are moving along here, so. Excellent. When we got together a couple weeks ago, I was really inspired by each of you and the other folks that were actually in the session, because it was one of those things where we all did truly leave our companies at the door. We thought bigger than ourselves, bigger than what's going on. We had to really think of something that was going to not only just stop the impact of climate change, but reverse it. And the unity that came out of that one was inspiring for me. So thank you for jumping on this panel. And I wanted to start first with a discussion between what this vision means to each of you. So if you can give us a perspective on that. And Rachel, can you start us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thanks so much for having me here today. And also, it was a great summit that we had, as you mentioned, in February. So, and we did spend a lot of time that day talking through our vision. And one thing that all of us kept going back to, especially me, are our children. Mm-hmm. And now with the pandemic, that was right before COVID broke out, as I recall. And even more so, just given the current times, thinking about the future for our children, for my children, and ensuring that means a safe and sustainable planet is really important. So if we talk about sort of what happened since we created that vision, obviously times have changed quite drastically. What we've seen, especially with our products at Facebook, is that, of course, the communities are coming together even more than they have even previously. And what we've seen is a significant increase in our messaging products, people trying to stay connected in this environment. So while there was a challenge for me personally, even before, on trying to develop and build the technology at Facebook to bring the world together, it's even more imperative now that we have this sustainable planet that not only connects people, but does so in a way that is not only good for our end users, but good for the economies in which we're operating, and brings the planet even more closer together. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we came together with this vision. This vision is even more important for me as I see it now. And it's really not only on a personal level, but also what we're doing in our day-to-day jobs.
Excellent. And by the way, you have 2 young kids, correct?
I have 3. So hopefully them barge in here while we are on this call here, but yes, 3.
Which is great. That's awesome. And you said that, being able to have a future for them, that was a theme that was across the board. And, Joe and Kristen and I have older kids, right? And Eddie has every gamut. So I think you have like 38 kids now, right, Eddie? Is that correct? Yeah. So I'd like to get perspective from Christian. So what did the vision mean to you?
Well, as you know, I always like to think about the long term. It's my curse. even beyond my own life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, the vision is all about the long term. And with that long term, I think for industry leaders, there comes this responsibility of doing all the things that, Rachel just mentioned, really. We owe it to our future. We owe it to humanity. I know it's a little motherhood and apple pie-ish and all of that, but, the thing that strikes me is I interviewed somebody a few years back, and I asked the person, what is the definition of sustainability? I generally ask that of everybody I interview. Mm-hmm. But this one person gave me a definition that really struck me. And it kind of aligns to this long-term and responsibility thing. He said, sustainability is to be around for the long term, and deservedly so. And that was the key thing that really struck me in his definition at the end, was the statement, deservedly so. Mm-hmm. And that's how I like to think about our industry. And so this is where that vision, is really where it strikes to me. It's really to bring that deservedly so aspect of our industry, because we don't deserve it if we provide all these services and everything, but we strip the planet of resources, right? Not that that's what we're doing, but the point is we need to think about our growth. And you heard earlier from Kate, you heard from Noel, the rapid growth the companies, at least our companies are, I know Facebook, Switch, really everyone on this conference, their companies are growing rapidly. Mm-hmm. There comes that responsibility. And so it then takes me back to this, I guess it was this forum, iMasons workshop we had in London, what was it, back in
November, yeah.
November. We had these little workshop groups, and one of the guys, his family's from, I think it was Somalia, somewhere down there. And we were talking about, sustainability, and he kind of brought me down to reality when he talked about his grandfather and how his grandfather would go fishing. They would, whatever's left of the fish, they would reuse and use it for farming, for fertilizer. And then at one point he went to kill an ant, and his grandfather stopped him and said, everything is going to help us for the future. And we need to really look at that whole ecosystem. And to me, that's the step we're taking. And that's the step we should be taking as iMasons. Mm-hmm. So it's really a positive impact to the whole ecosystem, which is, what the vision statement is implicitly saying.
Yep. Every click improves the future.
Yep.
It's a lot packed into that statement.
Yeah, exactly.
So Eddie, give us your perspective on what the vision means to you. And by the way, just a reminder, Eddie's the executive sponsor for the sustainability initiative here at iMasons. So thanks for your commitment on this too, Eddie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing that really stands out to me about the vision, not only the positive aspects of it, but also the inclusiveness of it. So it's not just about, carbon reduction. It's about sustainability as it impacts, every aspect of our life. And one of the most important aspects of understanding our roles in sustainability is understanding our dependency on each other, and that, each other as not only in the sense of industry, but also as a humanity. And from that perspective, really if this vision forces us to think about what I do in my work life, what do I do in my career, and as I make decisions and everyday actions, but also, how do I behave and how do I act, and what becomes sort of the unified compass that we all follow in order to drive sustainability as a practice and a best practice in our daily walk. So for me, this is it's not about shaming people into, or companies into, performing a certain way. It's not even about trying to force one person or one organization's moral aspects to another. It's about unifying around a common set of goals and ideas that lead us to a brighter future for all of us. And we know that this industry is growing. We know that digital infrastructure is growing. The pandemic has proved how important it is to us in our daily walk and our ability to sustain each other economically. So ultimately, I would say that we're ripe for the opportunity to do this right now.
And Eddie, when we were in the session, one thing that Joe brought back up was that this isn't just about sustainability for being sustainable. There has to be a balance here. And Joe, you talk about the economic aspect. Do you think the second sentence we had in there, that it's actually going to be doing a balanced approach across it? There's got to be an ecosystem of harmony. So can you share a little bit more about the vision from that perspective?
Yeah. You hear me okay, Dean?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. So, for me personally, the vision, it's very compelling. For those who don't know, I have lived my entire life in Silicon Valley. I was born right here in San Jose and grew up here when Silicon Valley was, the valley of the heart's delight, meaning that it was very fertile land and everywhere around us were orchards. And as a kid, during summer break, I would be riding my bike up what is now El Camino Real. And, I could ride from San Jose all the way up to South San Francisco. And my parents never thought anything about letting me do that because it was okay. You would never, as a parent, allow your child to do that today because of the congestion, because of the traffic, because it's just a large road with nothing but strip malls on both sides. But what I've seen Silicon Valley do over the years is fundamentally change the world, and usually for the better. So while we've compromised some things, starting out in the earliest days, with California Microwave and the defense industry that grew up in Silicon Valley, and you had Lockheed Martin that was here, a big employer in the valley, and then moving into biomedical and biotech. And of course, the advent of the semiconductor and how Silicon Valley got its name, and then moving into software and now all of the online, services. So the Valley has continued to reinvent itself, and at the same time, we have continued to expand the global commerce, meaning that all of the technology invented here in the Valley has helped others. And proven out more so than any other time during COVID right now, when everyone is forced to work from home and companies are still looking at how do I maintain, my company trajectory? How do I still enable business to business and business to consumer commerce in a time when we can't go in and physically be in stores with our customers? We can't be in our offices working together collaboratively. And a lot of the tools and systems that have enabled this to still carry on are because of the companies represented right here on this call today and represented, in the Valley here. And so to me, the kind of the phrase that Christian uses about, being around for the long run and deservedly so really resonates with me, because the other thing that I've noticed is that the air has never been more clean in Silicon Valley that I can remember.
Yeah.
The water is, there's evidence of waterways that are actually being more clean. So the world actually rejuvenates and takes care of itself as long as we don't get in the way. And so we can build a world where every click really does improve the future, that we are a net additive to the global benefit, as opposed to just being a technology industry that is viewed as taking natural resources. And to me, that encompasses all aspects of sustainability, from renewable energy and water use and clean waterways and congestion and air pollution and everything else that goes along with it. So it really is, it's a vision that enables us to look at this across the entire gamut, and it just really resonates with me.
Awesome. And I want to go into a little bit about what this means to your day job, because each of you have very significant roles with a lot of authority to, enact change. So as we take this broader industry view of every click improves the future, as you double click into that, pardon the pun, what does that mean for actions within what you do at your companies? And this is open for anybody, so feel free to jump in.
So for me, you know, I'm actually tackling this probably a little bit differently than some of the other folks in that, you know, fortunately I have a boss who you heard from earlier that let me take kind of a, I don't want to say orthogonal, but take a little different direction in my career, moving away more from the day-to-day kind of activities of building out capacity to more focusing on the future. And you heard Noel mention that actually. So, you know, after my sabbatical 2 years ago, and part of my sabbatical was thinking about what I wanted to be when I grow up. So I'm still an infant in my mind. And I really wanted to focus on the future. And this is the other reason this whole vision really resonates with me, because it is about the future. And so when I think about that, it's really quite satisfying to know that, you know, the focus of what I'm working on, which is, and it aligned, the focus that I'm working on actually aligns with what we as an industry are working on. Now, granted, I get to spend maybe more of my time doing this, but it's really about, you know, the vision that I have, for example, is how do I make the data center disappear? And you guys have heard me say this for a decade now. Well, now I get to actually play in the sandbox and see how do we make it disappear. And it's not a literal disappearance, it's a figurative disappearance. But how do we question everything in our ecosystem and see what value does it add and does it need to be there? And how do we rethink the whole thing? How do we think bigger? How do we think broader? And at the end of the day, lead by example. So my current job is about all of these things. And so seeing the industry having alignment with where I want to take things, you know, just within my own little ecosystem is really quite satisfying. So I see it as just a great alignment. I don't necessarily see it changing my job other than maybe porting some of what I work on, partnering with some of the other folks that might, you know, some of these things might be so big that one company can't do it. Right? So to me, it just opens up that, and of course, all of you have heard, how do we do things collectively together that we wouldn't have been able to do as individual companies just because of the scale and the magnitude of whatever that is? I don't think we have all the answers there yet, but at the end of the day, I think that is what we're going to be doing. And I think this is all in its infancy right now. So, you know, that's how I think I look at it, but it's really all of the above.
So by the way, we all are jealous about your job.
Yeah, I
want to
am
do it every day.
Great job. And I love Noel for it. Yeah. So.
Joe, you were going to jump in?
Yeah. Along the lines of what Christian was saying, I think that because of our companies and the roles that we play in our companies, it affords us the opportunity to help to lead by example. You know that we've been, you know, at Google kind of really pioneering the move towards renewable energy for, you know, over a decade. And along the way, one of our internal principles was that whatever we do, whether it's through public policy or through advocacy, that we wouldn't be doing it on behalf of Google, that we would be doing it on behalf of any company that wanted to follow suit and to procure or purchase renewable energy to power their operations. And that's something that, you know, because, you know, we're large customers, frankly, of the power industry, we have a big voice. And that's an area where we've been able to amplify our voice and help others to follow suit. And we do a lot of the same with other operational things that we've worked on. You know that we've worked a lot on AI machine learning models that help us improve operations, that help us actually predict the output of renewable energy production like 36 hours in advance, so that the people that operate the grids can count on it for baseload, so that it becomes more useful. And then, you know, most recently, even just today, we launched the blog post where we developed an AI-based program that shifts load, meaning applications and workloads that are able to be time shifted, we shift them to the times of the day when we're consuming the most renewable energy in each of the local grids throughout the data centers. So all of those things combined are things that ultimately can flow through to other companies in the industry, big and small. And so, I just think that this really gives us the platform to help do that, and not just for our own benefit, but for others as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, when you were accepting the award with for the Sustainability Champion, on behalf of your team, by the way, amazing work. The per hour alignment that I talked about, right, with Kate, that's the next challenge. And you even said then you don't know exactly how you're going to do it yet, but you're going to do
Right.
it.
Yep. And that's kind of the vision, is that there's things that you want to achieve, and even if there's not a roadmap of how to get there today, unless you shoot for those moonshots, you're never going to get there. And it stems throughout the entire company that our objectives are designed to be very stretch goals, and even if you meet 70%, that's far better than if you had taken an easier target that you knew you could achieve.
Yep. Excellent. So Rachel, you and I first met, I think it was 2012, and you were going after a whole bunch of renewable energy even back then, right?
Yeah.
And your role has expanded just amazing right now. Can you share us a little bit more about what it means from your day job?
Well, I'd love to. And what's really been striking about the conversations today in this panel is that all of our objectives are very similar to each other's, even separately as individual companies. And so I'm fortunate to work in a role and at a scale where we do have the ability to make a big impact in this space. And like the other companies, we've been really focused on renewable energy as part of our commitment this year to lower our emissions by 75%. So we're on track to do that. We're going to hit 100% renewable energy across all of our operations. That's including data centers and offices this year. So we're on track to achieve that. And that's been a lot of hard work to be able to get there, but also similar to what Joe was saying, one of our goals has been as a company to foster innovation, transparency in the industry as a means of driving it forward. So if you go back, and for people who are familiar with the Open Compute Project, which is something we started back in 2011, that really was an industry effort to share our open designs around infrastructure and technology to be able to drive efficiencies and improvements in the industry altogether. And what we found is a lot of companies globally came together and learned, and we had smaller companies saying, hey, I would have never known how to do this on my own, but this propelled me to be able to remove significant amounts of energy from the way I operate, which is part of the first goal. If you could avoid consuming in the first place, that's the first goal. Second goal is once you consume, can you offset it? So the next step that we took is really to figure out on our renewable energy program how we can make it open for others. So what we really set out to do is drive green tariffs and green tariff adoption in states that didn't have ways for companies to achieve renewable energy. And what that did is open up not only the procurement in those states, but also new projects, renewable energy projects to open in those states. And so similar to what Google has done, we're right around the 5,000 megawatt procurement for renewable energy right now. And that's been through a lot of hard work and sort of driving that. And we've seen success. I want to point out that even though we haven't done some of these as together as sort of peer-to-peer driving it forward, we have similar objectives. And what you saw even 5 to 10 years ago is that renewable energy was really expensive, prohibitively expensive for a lot of companies, and it was very difficult to acquire. So now what you've seen is the shifting of supply and demand through a lot of these efforts to really bring that down. And we're seeing, renewable energy exceed coal in a lot of places, and at rates that are less than brown power rates, which people probably would have expected many years ago. So, I think it just underscores the initiative here and the importance of us as industry partners to come together and drive towards these common goals, because together we can achieve so much more than we would be able to do individually. And I think there's a lot of promise in that for us.
Absolutely. And just if everyone's keeping track here, that's 10 gigawatts so far, just mentioned on this call. right? Joe, you exceeded 5 gigawatts. Rachel exceeded 5 gigawatts. I just have to believe there's similar numbers with the other large peers in this. But Eddie, you're Chief Technology Officer at Switch, and I remember, all of us were involved in the actions that Greenpeace was doing within the Click and Clean reports and that type of thing. And regardless of how people take the report, there was positive change that came out of that. There was definitely movement because, just like Rachel was saying, data was shared. And how are you influencing? And what Joe was just mentioning, they got a matrix to be able to see, are you making a positive impact and actually making progress against it? So can you tell me a little bit more about, from your day job in that context, what this means?
As Switch we've been for a while, driving our data center, particularly our Nevada data centers have been operated and ran on 100% sustainable energy. And for our customers, they get the benefit of that as well. When I was a customer prior to being at Switch, I ended up on the top 20 on the sustainability index, quite frankly, because a lot of my energy was being consumed through Switch. Yeah. But, I think that's also sort of a side effect if you look at our industry of how we can help each other. Because, in that scenario, my other data centers were not located in locations where you could get sustainable energy in a reasonable way. And I think that is, an example of, how those things come together. But, if Greenpeace really wouldn't have challenged us, and I remember all of us responding, in fact, Rachel, you weren't part of that conversation at the time, but Joe, Christian, and I, and Dean were all part of the Green Grid back then. And we were really responding to this and trying to understand how we were going to respond as an industry. And, it wasn't a great feeling to have Greenpeace poke people in the nose and tell them that they weren't doing well. But it was sort of the first opportunity that anyone sort of put out there, a gauge to say, hey, are you doing well or not? Do you care or do you not? And I think that, obviously, there may be other ways to approach that. I think Noel talks about some of those. But I would, at the end of the day, say that, it did position us where we had to respond as companies to that. I would just say that, Switch intends to stay ahead of that. And we make every effort to stay ahead of that, number one. And number two, I think, when you look at how we make decisions around product or how we make decisions around, supporting the digital transformation of companies, or, when we make decisions around what, targets are the right business targets and what are the right, shareholder value targets that we have. I mean, they all involve and consider sustainability as a major decision factor in every step of the way. And I won't go into too much detail about this, but I mean, there was a time not less than 10 years ago when we polled a lot of companies and we're talking to a bunch of groups about just a simple thing as, site placement and how to make that choice. And while all of us were actively engaged in doing, sustainable practices, sustainability was not a key factor in decision practice on where you were going to place your sites. I don't think that's true anymore. So I think those are just examples of, where in the last 10 years, we've seen a tremendous change in the industry. But, for me specifically, I think when we talk about the values too and coming up, if we're adopting the same values, and this is part of what iMasons is about, is us sharing our knowledge, our skill, our history, our experience with those who are coming up and amongst each other, and sort of setting the guide for what a true, craftsman can be for building this digital infrastructure and this platform environment for the internet and for e-commerce and all the rest of our businesses and our world. And when you think about us sharing our values around sustainability and what that means and how we define sustainability will help all of us make regular decisions and make them in a way that is sustainable and supports our vision.
And if you think about, the what happened with the Greenpeace report, it started with a negative, and it was, how dirty is your cloud? And then it basically is transformed into clicking clean. And if I watch the progression of that one, like Gary Cook came in and really changed the narrative. It's like, how can we go back and work together? And there was a lot of collaboration that started happening because it took a negative and turned it into a positive. And that's really important. You think about, my last question for this panel is, how do we work together on being able to achieve this vision. Because what came out of those sessions for me that really inspired me is that there's a lot of passionate people, you plus the other folks that were there, that care very much about this. So how can we work together to do that?
So let me just give the perspective on that. If I think about, you know, we were talking, you know, Noel mentioned how many megawatts we did in a week or two.
100.
You know, we're talking about five gigawatts, right? And so we're all talking really big numbers, but you could argue we're in our infancy, right? We're going to grow 10x. So that means multiply all those numbers by 10.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's renewable, how proud are you? How proud are we of that fact? I think 50 gigawatts of renewable for a single industry. Well, that's one company, but add the whole industry, you're probably talking a terawatt, right? Yep. How does that make sense? So my question is, how do we make the industry disappear, right? How do we think even beyond the satisfaction of doing renewable, which has carbon content, right? I mean, lots of carbon content if you think about the infrastructure. What do you do with assets that are not being used because you're moving workloads? I mean, there's carbon content in those too. How do we really think bigger to make the industry disappear? And that's, I think, what we have to really kind of collectively do, because everything, the solutions to our problems today will become our problems of the future, right? And this is the interesting thing, that when I do and I dig into all this stuff that we're all doing, you know, my own company is doing, it's a very nonlinear problem. How do we make that nonlinear problem, that inelasticity of all of these resources, how do we actually make that better as opposed to worse? Whether it's carbon content, whether, you know, all this stuff. And so that's the thing I think we collectively have to work on. And my final statement is, when I look at the damn poll that everyone answered, and everyone's looking forward to traveling again, 34% or whatever the hell it was. Well, holy cow. As an industry, maybe that's one thing we should think about. How do we rethink how we actually interact with each other? Who are really the essential travelers, right? And so those are the things I think we need to really explore as an industry.
Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that I am proud about in this industry is that we've been largely self-governed, meaning that, you know, if you go back to, you know, we talked about the green grid and focus on PUE, and it was very simplistic. Sorry, Christian, I don't mean to call your work simplistic, but
no.
It was.
I think it's irrelevant now, so I'm with you.
Okay. All right. But the fact is that it was something that was easily absorbed by everyone, and the industry took it on ourselves because we had a vested interest in reducing our PUE, reducing the overhead, because it was good for business. It made dollars and cents also. And we started doing it long before any regulatory agency came out and started mandating targets that we had to meet and all that. And so I'm proud of the legacy that we have of self-governing. And now's another example of when we can be self-governing, because what happens when, you know, regulators around the world decide to come in and put targets on something or put, you know, mandates on something? Oftentimes they're not the experts, and so targets are set without full information. And so I think we have a real opportunity now to lead the way, define the narrative, and to be out front of this, and to help the industry once again self-govern. And to your point, Christian, I agree that we need to do more in terms of workloads that are shifted to more efficient, you know, spaces, like moving to public cloud, and you know, largely everyone agrees that that is more energy efficient. But oftentimes the workloads are, you know, those data centers, those enterprise data centers, they don't often go away. They get repurposed for other things. They may be reduced in size, but it's the same thing that we've seen over the years with server refresh. You know, the servers always don't all go away. They just become print servers or other things, you know, and so it becomes additive instead of replacement. And I think that if we really focus on that replacement, we can make a huge progress, because the 10x problem that you said is true, but it doesn't have to be all additive, because it can be replacing a lot of that that energy that is consumed in a much more distributed fashion today. So so that's, I think, an opportunity that we have as iMasons to help frame that narrative and to evangelize.
Yeah, I think your point, though, of being a proactive industry is an awesome point, and we should continue to do that. That's absolutely correct.
Yep. Rachel, your thoughts on how we can work together on this?
Yeah, as an industry, I would love to see us move beyond the thought that sustainability is a nice to have, or if it's too expensive. I think what we've proven is that it shouldn't be a nice to have. It should be something that we're all striving for, and we've been able to do it in a cost-effective manner. So I'd love to see the industry transition to that common thought and narrative. I think that starts from a lot of us in iMasons and those who have been really focused on this to really set the tone for the industry and the players in there. And what I love about all the work that we're doing, and I love about Microsoft's recent announcement too, is it sets the bar. Like, we keep setting the bar higher for ourselves as an industry, which I think is awesome, because it holds us up to that next level. And as that, I think that the next step is just making sure that we're united and speaking with a common voice. And I think we can drive a lot of impact by doing that and coming together to not only help ourselves or think about ourselves and what we're doing to reduce our impact, but those in the industry around us. And I think one key point that we had brought up earlier, not just in this panel, but in the discussion with Noel, is around transparency. And I do think that's one of the ways that we will hold ourselves to that higher standard is how much are we consuming? How are we driving it down? How do we measure ourselves on this? And if we can come up with those common industry standards of doing that as well, I think what as we've discussed here, it will help unite us and drive us together along a common path.
Right. And I just remember starting with a baseline, you have something to measure against. And I think that, the idea of a renewable energy index or something, you already have your metrics, right? Or your numbers that now we can start to get the entire baseline for the world. Then we can show what we're all going to go after. And then we start to see it's reversing climate change. So Eddie, wrap us up with your thoughts about this one, and we're going to go into another segment.
Yeah, I think what we're doing it right now, right? Just participating. We've got at least 146 people on here right now that represent the industry and that want and care about what we're doing. And, as we move into talking about our vision and values and what the initiatives are that we're considering, getting the feedback and getting involved is probably the most critical step you can take. And understanding that, your voice, your ideas, your collaboration, and the joint development of our vision and where we go and our values and our steps towards doing this as an industry make a difference. And without that, then it's a handful of people trying to influence the entire world, as opposed to a larger body of people who really do have an influence and can together make an impact that's incredible. And people take notice, right? It's just like every viral video that goes on these days. Once there's if there's something sustaining there, then it's going to be something that people will continue to go back to. And I think we're promoting the right approach to this, and I think it's the right vision. And I think as we go over the values and the initiatives, we'll see that these are well thought out. But I definitely am looking forward to the feedback from the organization, and how do we take that and make it actionable steps as a group that we can do together that will make an impact. So that's how I'd wrap it up. Excellent.
All right, so we're going to try something new here, okay? And I don't know if it's going to work, but hey, we gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. So for the folks that are on the panel, or sorry, the folks that are on the session here, you've heard what this means to the leaders that are in this panel. Now we want to hear what this vision means to you. So every click improves the future. So we're going to start to have you submit these as questions. So this is just a comment. Put this into the Q&A section. Submit your thoughts on what it means to you. You can also start uploading or upvoting the submissions that are in there. The goal here is to take this 100 plus people, 146 people, to gather as much content as we can. So when you're submitting the upvoting, we will be discussing the feedback with a panel. As people are thinking about this, I do want to float the idea of that renewable energy index. So your thoughts on, do you think that's something like PUE that became a very simple way for us to measure at least how well we're using power in a data center? Is something like that feasible?
I'm going to share my comments about it. I was there when we first started discussing PUE and usable work and what that meant, and how do we determine, and something we could measure to say whether or not we're performing well. What I liked about PUE, it's kind of like a golf score. Amongst friends, your golf score is always better than it is in a tournament in a reality, right? But at the end of the day, it's a personal, it's one you can apply personally. It's one that you don't have to look at peers and say, oh, am I competing well or not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think an index offers that opportunity when we say, look, as an industry, we feel like this is a sustainable operation. And you can pick a lot of different functions, but you could say, for every kilobyte, processed, or for every, whatever size, metric you want to use, whatever gigabyte of storage you have, or, you could basically go through all the digital infrastructure and provide different data points. Those key indicators can translate to, carbon impact, or translate to carbon storage, or whatever, becomes the outlier. You can take that number, go back, figure out how to calculate that in your own environment, and start working towards an internal goal of how to improve yourself without having to go publish anything,
Mm-hmm.
or put yourself or your company in a place of shame. And I think that's a key factor, right? Is the goal here is for us to positively help each other improve our industry and our consumption and how we do things, not to go and try to put to shame everyone who's not. And I think at the end of the day, the outcomes are, collectively we build a better industry, and we have a much bigger impact if we approach it that way. There are clearly indices out there where you have to publish things and do things like that. I don't know how I feel about that yet. I think if we have the right metrics and we have the right culture, then maybe that will support that. But I don't want to approach it from day one like that. I think it's something that you as an individual have to ask yourself about what your impact is, and then you as an influencer in your company and in your business, what the impact would be.
Yeah, Eddie's right on the mark. I mean, I think back to PUE, and PUE came about because I had a recommended customer to do certain changes to their data center. This is back in the 90s. The customer made all the changes, got me to go all the way back to Japan. It was a customer in Japan. They did hot aisle, cold aisle, all these things that are all basics today, but we were pushing back then. And they said, go in the data center. All the temperatures are the same, but go in the data center. Nothing's really changed except, and they made me walk down the hot aisle, and they go, no one wants to work here now.
Mm.
And so they said, we're going to change everything back the way it was. And I'm like, temperatures are the same, but do you know you're operating much more efficiently? And they go, how can we measure that? And on the plane ride back home, that's all I was thinking about is these, I don't want to say idiots, but these people, not educated people, were going to change everything back. And I needed something to tell them how they could measure it. But keep in mind, in that 3 months, the capacity of the data center changed. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't just measure power. And so that was the whole thing about where PUE came from, was just to show this customer that compared to before, they were better now. And that to me is the power of PUE, and that to me is the power of metrics. The fact that it became this thing where people are comparing and all of that, and people drove standards on how to measure, to me that makes it irrelevant because it's missing the purpose. And so hearing Eddie say that to me is so on the mark, and that's what metrics should be about, is how do we improve over what we've been doing before, instead of spending all our goddamn time focusing on how do we compare it to this person? Well, this person didn't measure it right because they didn't include. Who cares? Are you getting better, right? And so, Eddie is totally on the mark in my book.
So we've
And-
got quite a few inputs coming in here from the Q&A side. Let me just read one of these and get your take on it. So the new saying is every click improves the future. How do we enlist the future workforce to develop greener solutions? What can we do as a community to make greener and renewable technologies easier to consume and deliver? Most of all, how can we change education to make green more mainstream? What are your thoughts on that? If this vision is going to go out there, right, can we impact that, a broader community?
I'm going to add to this. So I think obviously we haven't, one of the pillars of iMissions is education. And I think it's been difficult to pull together all of our initiatives in education because it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and what you find, like in most organizations, there's sort of the 80-20 rule. So I'll double down on this. 80% of people who participate in our meetings but don't actually add feedback or provide content back, we need your help. I mean, at the end of the day, all of us communicating with our alma maters are going back and talking to our community schools or colleges, or adding this, curriculum or developing curriculum. Sorry about my robot, but as we put all those things back in to feedback, I think all of this learning and sharing gets put back into curriculum. I mean, it's something that we're missing in our colleges today. To understand that when we go build an object, a data object of code that we're going to go implement, if we had taken a different best practice, we probably could have been more sustainable maybe. So I think that's just one example of it. But, if we don't contribute as a group back into the content that goes into our education programs and also into what we would do in our initiatives for sustainability, then the outcomes are the same. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because what it makes me think about is we are probably in an industry where the consumer isn't paying for the product in many cases, or not directly, and so does my kid care that he's using a lot of data by downloading videos? It's free, so he has no sense of true cost for that. Now, of course, on the back end, the money's getting there somehow, right, to support it. But, I think part of it is how do you externalize the true impact of all this stuff in a way that is tangible for the end user ultimately? And that, I don't have an answer, but that's what that question just makes me think about. That, part of the answer at some point has to be to externalize the true impact to the planet, whether that's through cost or other stuff in everything we do. And we don't do a good job as a society around that, right? And that could be where actually our industry actually helps track that and provide that information, using AI and using whatever. So everyone at the end of the day, they go home and they've got what their index is on how much carbon they've consumed, right? I mean, somehow to externalize all this, and that's a really that question prompts some really interesting thinking in my mind. But with no answer right now.
As much on the psychology side as on the science of the actual energy consumption. What is the psychology associated with people that are consuming without thinking about what the impact is? And it might even be as simple as, many of us, I think, have probably Nest thermostats or some Nest products, but every month you get a email with the report of how many Nest Leafs you earned this month, and how many compared to like people in your neighborhood and that sort of thing. What percentile were you in? Maybe it's something as simple as that. It's a very easy metric that establishes your consumption of internet, resources or whatever. I do think that it's very complex, because how do you determine the net worth of a click? That's why I like our vision, because it doesn't matter what the click is.
Yeah.
We want it to be a net positive. It should improve the future. I don't want to make a judgment about whether that click was worth it or not, because that's a personal value system. And I don't want to be in the position of trying to impose, values on people. I do want to be in a position of saying, regardless of what the click was for, we are striving to make sure that every click is improving the future.
So, Rachel, I would like you to wrap up for us. We've got to end this input. And by the way, thank you, folks. We're getting a ton of input here. Continue to put that back in. But one that pops up here was from Andrew Stevens, and what the vision meant to him was, how do you, from a business standpoint, make this a boardroom metric, or an imperative? Is there a way to raise that visibility?
Well, I think, and then I think that's a fantastic question, and I love it because it does talk about sort of how it is an imperative and how we can raise it within each of our organizations. I think, speaking for each of us across this panel and the companies represented, I think it is a very visible sort of topic that, whether it's at the boardroom table or not, I can tell you, Mark Zuckerberg gets these questions on sustainability probably every other week at his weekly Q&A. So I think it's something that's being driven by the workforce. The last question was about how do we integrate it more into the workforce. I think it's there, because I think more and more this is a topic that's not only the most important for our employees, but for our user base as well. And I think that by itself is going to drive some of the trajectory, the importance for us to be able to kind of push this within our companies and raise the importance, if it's not even there yet, because it's a very important topic to society. So I think it's going to get there on its own. I think the more we can sort of raise the bar as the industry, raise the bar with each other and our own organizations. And I love this idea, fully agree with Eddie and Christian, that the metric should be there to help sort of raise the bar within ourselves, not to compete more or less, but to just continue to do better. And I think that's how we transition and change the trajectory of how this is integrated into the workforce, into the boardroom, into our day-to-day jobs. And I'm really excited to see the trajectory that we're on already.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Great wrap up.